Oh, hold on. There we go.
All right. Okay, so if I am doing everything correctly, we should be live here. Appreciate you taking off a Saturday to do this with me. Obviously, we've got a bit of a time difference between you and me, and I didn't want to keep you up too late. So yeah, the weekday with a full 40-hour week just wouldn't work. I would have had you up to like 2 or 3 in the morning. But obviously, everybody, this is Adrian Tchaikovsky. I almost said you've been writing since 2008, but let's face it, you've been published since 2008. Every writer has probably been writing in his entire life, which brings me up to the question that I like to ask everybody. Not everybody who wants to write obviously ever puts out a book. So what is your supervillain origin story?
Well, so I have not been writing my whole life. I started when I was about 17. Before then, the same kind of creative efforts were very much going into role-playing games. I was the inveterate games master. I did my world building and I did my sort of character creation for an audience of 4 players. And then I came across the Dragonlance Chronicles by Weiss and Hickman, which I enormously enjoyed, which are very much someone's write-up of their own Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And so that was the light bulb moment. It was just sort of, well, this bridges where I am to being a published author. This is something I could conceivably do. And as it happened, it wasn't actually something I could do because it's a craft and you have to learn it. And my early efforts were absolutely dreadful. But I kept on going and I wrote and I submitted and I wrote and I submitted for about 15 years, honestly. And then, yes, around 2007, I finally got myself an agent with the first Shadows of the Apt book and have basically been in print ever since.
Yeah, you are pretty prolific. I had not realized, of course, as a lot of people, I kind of discovered you when Children of Time came out. Hugo Award-winning series, in case anybody hasn't read that yet.
Not Hugo Award-winning series for tedious and in fact ridiculous reasons. But no, I gave it back.
I thought the Children of Time series
won. It did, but it didn't win fairly because of the frankly absurd shenanigans going on at that year's Hugo ceremony. So I have disavowed the award.
Disavowed it. Okay, let me put it this way: Hugo Award deserving.
That's very kind.
All right, kind of that, and then of course, obviously, wrong side. I always get this backwards. Service model. Service model. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Was obviously really, really good. And then, of course, Alien Clay, which, again, I apologize to you. I don't know how I missed the hardcover coming out.
It was in the UK only.
Oh, that's why I missed it.
Yes, the copy you've got there is the US release, and it was released straight to paperback.
Got you. Okay, because I was like looking at it later and was like, wait, I thought this was his new book. And then I'm like, I found this beautiful blue cover, by the way. The UK edition, they got the gorgeous cover. That thing that's so I gotta get a copy of that because that's the one I want on my trophy shelf back here. But yeah, Alien Clay, obviously the new one comes out the 17th, Tuesday. One of the things though that you mentioned about you starting out with the Dungeons and Dragons, I've actually found out that there's a few people I feel like. Obviously, we talk about Weiss and Hickman, and Margaret's absolutely a joy to talk to. The other one that I know, Jen Lyons, also, she's big into the whole Dungeon Master thing. In fact, the entire series, Chorus of Dragons, was based on a campaign. So there's a lot of really good fantasy authors that kind of have that Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I mean, Ericsson's Malazan books are based on a campaign he ran. I believe Raymond Feist's books, the Magician books, are most, not all, but certainly most writers of my general vintage seem to have been gamers first.
Gotcha. Sorry about that. My wife's doing something upstairs. I heard knocking. I was trying to figure out if she was getting my attention or not. Apologies. The joys of having a studio in your own house.
Oh yeah.
But all right. So that's the start. One of the things, a couple things I like to ask all authors. Obviously, I'm going to get into the book soon because I'm a book nerd and I enjoy it. But I know there are some aspiring authors out there. So there's a few questions I like to ask. One, for somebody who wants to be an author, and this question has no right answer. Everybody's got a different setup. What does a day in the life of Adrian Tchaikovsky look like? And am I pronouncing that right?
Yes. So it's pronounced like the composer. So on average at the moment, I'm up in the mornings fairly early. I get my writing stint done in a big shift in the morning. That's purely because I'm generally up because I'm getting my son off to school. Back when I had a day job, I would write in the evenings. When I'm traveling, I'll write on a train. I am fortunate enough to be extremely flexible. I don't have rituals. I don't have particular conditions. If I can sit somewhere with my headphones on and enough space to put down a very, very small laptop and ideally get a cup of coffee, I can just write. But yeah, at the moment, mornings for preference, and then the afternoons will just be, there will inevitably be some sort of admin or proofs or something I need to faff about with that is nowhere near as fun as writing, but does need to be done. But my key thing is I try to get something written every day.
Nice. And a lot of them do. Some I get there's some people that they gotta have the moment, they gotta have the muse, but there are others I write something. It may be crap, but I may be able to go back to that later and make something out of it because I've got that base. One thing that you said, and I feel like this is every aspiring author's dream, is the fact that you were able to say back when I had a day job.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel like that is the goal, not even from necessarily a monetary. I want to make a certain amount of money. I want this to pay off, but I want my writing to pay off enough that writing is what I get to do. This is my 40-hour-a-week job, and it is a 40-hour-a-week job. I think a lot of aspiring authors may not realize stuff like this. Obviously, you have to write the book, but there's marketing and all this stuff. There, not everybody. There's very few James Pattersons in the world who've got an entire team marketing and publishing, and even he has to go out on book tours and stuff sometimes.
Oh yeah, I mean the thing is, a lot of the other stuff is also quite fun. I very much enjoy going to conventions, especially because writing is pretty solitary, and that's where you connect with other writers. What I don't enjoy is just the backroom admin. I'm doing proofs on a book that's coming out next year at the moment, and proofs are so deadly dull because it's a book you've looked at like a dozen times, and you've got to go through it one more time in enormous detail because it's the last chance you'll ever get to make sure everything's right, and you are so sick. Most of the time, you are so sick of the book at that point. There have been a very small number of books where I've still been really enjoying my own work, even at that remove, which I've got to feel is probably a good sign for those books. Certainly that they work for an audience of one at least. But in general, you get to that point and it is just utter tedium, and it takes days to do, and you've just got to wade through it.
I think authors kind of have the same problem that actors do too, in the fact that by the time you're out there marketing something, you're done with that. You're probably working on something else.
Yes, no, I am. So obviously, Alien Clay Service Model. These are books I was working on 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. I've delivered at least half a dozen manuscripts since then. So this whole sort of chain of things I've just sort of fired off into the ether that are all going to come home at various times for me to have another look at. And so it's just this constant weird juggling. And yes, the book that's in your head is never the book that people are talking about.
Exactly. And part of me, I want to point out this too, because I've had an author do it before. But this is the excuse. And I want everybody who's viewing this to realize, if you're talking to an author and you say something and they're like, did I write that? They've written 12 other books since then, probably. Maybe they're not published, but it's like, that's a lot to keep straight. You're trying to remember something you wrote 3 years ago. I mean, you ask the average human being what they did last week, and they're like, I don't know. So I do appreciate it. And like I said, that's why I always appreciate you guys coming on too, is because I know that right now doing this, it's taking time out of whatever else you're working on. And we will bug you about what you're working on later, but we'll get to that in a minute. The other question that I like to ask, and this is another one of those aspiring authors questions, is there some sort of advice or something that you were given or wished you had gotten earlier that may have smoothed out some of the bumps in the road?
I mean, so one of the problems I had when I was trying to get published was that I was very, very convinced that everything I wrote was gold dust, and people were fools for not publishing it. If someone had turned up with a free and frank critique of my work, I would probably not have listened, because I was just in that kind of place. If you are in a position to get a good critique, and if you're in a position to actually be humble enough to accept that, that's a really good thing. I could probably have shaved some years off by doing that. As it was, I basically had to learn it all by hand and the hard way, and just by reading a lot of books and writing a lot of books, and each book being incrementally better than the previous one until I was finally up to a publishable standard. And I know this is the case because when I got that first book into print, I thought, well, this is great. I've got like 15 books in the drawer. I never need to write again if I don't want to. I can just keep firing them off. And then I went back and read them, and I've been able to save 2 of those books. And they were absolutely the most recent 2 before the Shadows of the App series kicked off. And the ones before that would have taken so much work to bring them up to a publishable standard. It just wasn't worth it, because I had new books I wanted to write. And I absolutely did not understand at the time I was writing them that these books were not of a publishable standard. These things I was sending off very proudly to publishers and agents and saying, look at this wonderful book. You would be fools if you didn't publish this book. And they were not fools, and they didn't publish it, and for good reason. And I've done my standard thing. I'm now not entirely sure what the question was that put me on this tack, and I'm not entirely sure whether I've answered it, but hopefully that's at least something to the point.
No, you did answer it. You answered it towards the beginning, and then we expounded, which is completely fine. I find that a lot of authors, once you've gotten deep enough, they kind of like start coming towards the middle of like, yeah, I'm a decent author. But I think a lot of them, they either start with like, this is the greatest book ever, everybody's going to want to read it, or you get the ones, and some of these, this one I think actually takes longer to get to that middle ground, is the ones who always feel like, I don't know how to write. I can't believe anybody actually read my book.
Yeah, and I suspect that on average, the second class are probably the better writer, because they're being more self-analytical and self-critical. But you're right that they probably take longer to get anywhere, because of that lack of self-confidence means you're probably not going to be submitting stuff in the same way.
Yeah, I feel they don't get that start because they're always waiting for that. They're always waiting to perfect the book. I don't think any book ever goes to print 100% perfected, or else it would never go to print.
I always end up picking typos out of existing published books anyway, but I mean, obviously typos are not necessarily what you mean. But I mean, one of the things, I think there's a big division in aspiring writers as to whether you write one book over and over, or whether you write book after book after book, which was the trajectory I took in. And to a certain extent, in that second way, you are burning a lot of ideas, but ideas are not usually what you're short of. As a writer, usually you have more ideas than you have time to get them onto a page. I suspect I genuinely benefited from writing multiple books. I think I might have gone a bit spare trying to perfect one book. But exactly. It's like everything in the writing process, it's a very personal thing.
Right. And it's based on a lot of the authors I talk to, sometimes you just write something because you've got this idea and you need to get it down on print. Otherwise, you end up with something that's like, I had an idea. Kind of like when you write that note in the middle of the night and you're like, I'll remember what this means in the morning. And then you open it up and it's like blue cottage cheese. What the heck was I thinking? You know,
I honestly, that has become weirdly, and it's slightly just inconveniently because it really screws your sleep patterns, but that has kind of become part of my writing practice now, in that I will frequently have ideas for the thing that's going to happen in the next chapter I'm going to write at about 3 a.m. And so I've got very good at just waking up, getting it down on my phone notes app in a sort of a brief and comprehensible fashion, and then desperately trying to get back to sleep.
Yeah, I feel like I'd have to have a digital recorder because if I tried to write shorthand, I would have no clue what I meant in the morning whatsoever. I have done that before. I've like thought of, obviously I don't write books, but like poems or something like that. And I'll think of a line that's great. And I'll like scribble something the next day. I'm like, I have no idea where I was going with this. None at all.
I think it helps a lot that it's something, if it's something I am on the project I'm currently working on, a few words can kind of stand in as a key to unlock a much larger idea.
Yeah. Nice. All right. So one other question. I'm starting this because I'm actually looking to do another series that's kind of author adjacent. And one of the things I want to talk about is obviously all the people. You're an author, you write a book, but to get a book published, there's a team. There's an agent, there's an editor, there's a publicist, just from the start, as an agent, the first thing I think most authors have to do is they've got to send out that manuscript, usually through an agent. What would you tell an aspiring author how to find an agent and what you look for in an agent?
It's very tricky at the moment. The agency market has changed, is almost unrecognizable from what, in the UK, which is the one I know, is from what it looked like when I was trying to get an agent in the early 2000s. At that point, there were maybe 4 or 5 genre agents in the country. Now there are many, many more. But there's a lot more, I think, fluidity with authors changing agents and with agents potentially focusing only on the authors who are already selling, which obviously is not terribly useful when you're a new author. It's other than the standard advice of make whatever you're submitting as good and interesting as possible, so that if you get that lucky roll of the dice and you find someone who is looking for an extra author writing that kind of thing, and they are in a good mood and they've had a good lunch and they are ready to appreciate what you sent them is then worthy of being appreciated. It's very, very difficult to say. So in the UK, there is a good convention scene. You can meet agents at conventions and get to the point of them saying, by all means, send me your manuscript. And at that point, you have kind of jumped that queue. You've got past the slush pile. They're expecting to hear from you, which is obviously an enormously useful position to be in. I'm imagining that in the States, there are probably also similar conventions, large or small, that you can go to and get that same kind of sort of access. I never did that. And I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I am not good at dealing with that kind of social situation. I think I would probably have got myself blacklisted by the entire industry by making myself a colossal nuisance. If you can do that particular sort of social dance, absolutely, I recommend giving that a go. Just getting a feel for the industry scene at that kind of convention. I mean, in the UK, there's FantasyCon, which is probably the convention that most attracts aspiring writers and just people in the industry in general, as opposed to just sort of readers and fans. And I'm sure there are the equivalents wherever you happen to be. Gotcha.
Yeah, I think too that I forgot where I was going to go with that. Moving on. I was just going to say that I think there's something to be said for getting your face in front of an agent, having a face with that name. But I also get that, not everybody wants to mingle.
Yeah. I mean, it is a specific skill set that doesn't really overlap with writing in any way.
Yeah, especially when a lot of writers aren't. Some are. Don't get me wrong. I've met a few authors that are absolutely get out there and they love talking to people. I found a lot more authors that have forced themselves to learn that skill because it's not something that comes natural to them. I want to get in a little bit on something about Alien Clay, and for anybody who has not, well, obviously a lot of people in the US haven't read this yet, but if you're thinking about reading Alien Clay, I don't know if you ever had this in mind or if it was some sort of can't think of the word I'm looking for, spark for the book, but it reminded me, certain parts of it reminded me a lot of Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I don't know if you've read that one. But that
I've not actually read much Heinlein, to be honest. I mean, full and frank confession, there are enormous gaps in my kind of
Me too.
Sort of, as it were, canon science fiction reading. I haven't read that many kind of golden age sci-fi authors much. Is that because of the political side of things?
Yes. That's Heinlein is obviously a thing where it's almost a prison system, but it's on the moon, and it's the people rising up against the system, the man. So it's not derivative of, but you ever see somebody and it's like, you don't look like so and so, but you remind me of so and so. It's kind of
I mean, I don't. Yeah, there's a good idea is worth revisiting, consciously or unconsciously. These things do go about in the atmosphere. I mean, with Alien Clay, the initial inception was very much actually the alien biology of it. So it's a book of two halves. It's the alien side is you have this world where evolution basically doesn't work by standard Darwinian principles. It's all very, very heavily invested in symbiosis, so that everything that appears to be a creature is a whole collection of things just Legoed together. So you've got a thing that's got good legs and a thing that's got a good digestive system, and this other thing has good eyes, and they all get together and form a creature. And then they might split up and form different creatures with other partners, and that the whole planetary ecosystem works this way. And dropped into the middle of this, you have a what are they called? The extrasolar labor camp, which is here to basically study the creatures and also the ruins, because apparently something on this mad world at some point was sentient enough to build stuff. The main character is a sort of political dissident scientist who's sent off for this particular effort, and the book contrasts this phenomenally sort of tyrannical authoritarian regime that's running the camp and wants very, very specific answers out of the scientists, with the fact that it's an alien world that doesn't run to any of the standard rules and is not ever going to give them those answers.
Yeah, well, let's face it, we do that a lot of stuff. We run a lot of studies and stuff looking for the answer we want it to come out with instead of just trying to find the answer.
It's also it's very specifically our authoritarian regimes. There is something weird about human psychology in that you can have all the guns and all the power, but it isn't enough to settle a weird kind of cognitive dissonance in the human mind, that you need some sort of external validation for the evil that you're doing. And sometimes this comes in the form of religion, and sometimes it comes in the form of a scientific validation. But you need to turn to some higher arbiter to say, yes, you are supposed to be at the top of the pyramid, and whatever you do to those below you is justified because of this reason, whether it's the divine right of kings or whether it's all of that weird 19th century sort of pseudoscience about, the 19th century race science or things like that. People need... There is some weird kind of conscience. I mean, this is what oddly hopeful. There is some kind of weird conscience ingrained enough in people's minds that they need to talk themselves into the position where they are allowed to exercise their abuses of power. And that's what Alien Clay is about. It's when you hit a kind of just an impediment to trying to justify your place at the heart of the universe, because you have this planet that absolutely doesn't care and doesn't play by your rules.
One of the things I loved about Alien Clay is the stuff that you wrote. There are certain things. I'm trying to avoid spoilers like the plague, since it's coming out in a couple days. Certain things that I kind of see that the direction it's on, but you don't necessarily end it the way I thought you were going to end it. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But I love that fact where it's not like, sometimes people throw a curveball just because they want to throw a curveball. They want to mess you up. And so sometimes it's like very disjointed. This kind of follows the path that I saw it following, but it still didn't necessarily end the way I saw it ending, which I think is hard to pull off, which is really, really hard to pull off, because I always love, because I've had a few conversations with authors too, when I talk about something about, something foreshadowing something else. And some authors like, yep, that's what I was going for. And some authors like, I didn't even realize I foreshadowed something. that was incidental. So, but yeah, this book, I do love the storyline. I'm going to dip into service model just for a second because I've got two questions that kind of match up. One for service model, one for Alien Clay. Service model, I think I liked it more just because it's much more my jam. I'm a big fantasy guy, but when it comes to sci-fi, there's something about robots, AIs, cyborgs, trying to live that life in a human world. I mean, there's a reason that Sea of Rust, Mal Goes to War, Murderbot, those are some of my favorites. And service model is very much in that same genre. How difficult is it? Because you've got to walk a fine line. I feel like you have to make your robots, AIs, whatever, a little bit human to make them relatable, but you don't want to write one in such a way where it's got fully human emotions and it's just a human being. How do you know when you've made that line?
I mean, that was very explicitly the challenge I set myself, was to have, I mean, though the Charles, the main character, it's not only that he's not human. By his own assessment, he's not even sapient. He's purely following a list of directions. And so the challenge in writing that is to produce this character who is relatable and sympathetic and that the audience are going to hopefully root for. But at the same time, once you start examining why he's doing anything, it is at least always plausible. And sometimes he goes into quite considerable detail examining his own motives to make sure he is only being a robot, because he occasionally gets accused of being sapient and has to deny it strenuously, to make sure that everything he's doing does make sense within that framework of, well, this is what he's trying to achieve. And these are the ever more convoluted chains of logic he's using to justify what he's doing as moving towards that goal. Because basically, he's a robot valet. It's the end of the world. No one needs a robot valet, but being a robot valet is what he has this enormous driving need to be, because that's what he's been programmed. And the mismatch between the task and the environment leads him to these incredibly complicated emergent behaviors in purely trying to find someone who wants a cup of tea.
Yeah, and I especially loved towards the beginning, and I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to try to paraphrase it, but I love the fact that on the one hand, he's got this thing where it's all logic, and it's, he's got these different routines that are telling him different things because of the fact that he no longer has a master. But on the other hand, he's also got a little bit of what I almost consider that sarcastic thing, not intentionally, but like he's talking about laying out the clothes for him and the fact that, he never travels anywhere. And there's some comment he made, and it was early on, but it was something along the lines of the fact that he didn't do much while he was alive. So the fact that he was dead shouldn't put much of a ripple in his schedule. And I just loved that line. I apologize that I'm not quoting it exactly, but I was like, that is completely my sense of humor. And it's one where you can kind of sneak that into something because you can make that just a statement of fact. So as a robot, it's not off character, but it's also definitely got that. If a human would said it, that would have been a very sarcastic comment. But love that. And so the reason I asked about service model, because I want to tie it in, is I think the other thing that you ran into with Alien Clay, and I think one of the things that you did, which is difficult to do, but you pulled it off, is we have an alien race that there's that ability a little bit to understand them, but this isn't a Star Trek alien where you just take a human being and slap a paper plate on his forehead and he's a different alien. These are not humanoid aliens. And I feel like almost even a movie like Aliens, a lot of bipedal, there's that whole, these are aliens. These are not anything that we would see on Earth.
Yes, and I mean, this is one of the things I do, and I think it's one of the things readers come to me for is the weird alien perspective. So I start with Children of Time, who have spiders, and then I've had a variety of kind of animal and alien perspectives in my books since. So I'm always trying to push the envelope of how weird can I make something while still having it comprehensible to a human reader. So, and certainly the creatures, or almost creatures in inverted commas, the environment, the ecology in Alien Clay is one of my weirdest. And then next year I've got a book coming out called Shroud, which is actually the one I'm doing proofs on at the moment, which is at least as weird, but in very different ways. And the speculation of how intelligence might turn out,
Gotcha.
how you might even converge on an intelligence that humans could in some way interact with, from very, very different starting points, is just a fascinating mental exercise for me.
Well, if it's anywhere near as good as these two, I'll be down for that. The other thing you'd mentioned, or you didn't mention, but in the book, I love the fact that, and we don't know this, you're talking about the ecology, the fact that, like, I remember there's a part in it where he's talking about the fact that there's not really soil at some point, the water going through and stuff like that, and the fact that even the ground, your plants are, they've all got this intermingle, and you've got to read the book to get the full picture of it, but everything is connected to each other, and almost everything is, I would consider, at least to a certain extent, sentient. Maybe not the water itself, but everything else.
Yeah, and even talking about things like plants, one of the things I do in a few books is point out that the division between animals and plants is an Earth thing. And you find a lot of sci-fi. Well, you go to this alien world, and there are alien animals and alien plants, and they're kind of identifiable as, well, these are, there is a logic to the shape of a tree. So right. We may well, if we find alien life, we may well find something that is tree shaped, because effectively there is a physics at work in why being a tree is useful. But that hard division between an animal and a plant kingdom that we perceive and that we kind of assume is really quite arbitrary, and there's no real reason why it would necessarily be the case. And in fact, if you look into the sea, for example, the number of immobile organisms there that are animals that look like plants to us, so corals and sponges and things like that, is enormous. So there are a lot of things we take for granted about the way life is, which are in fact purely local conditions and wouldn't necessarily generalize to an alien world. And that's always a fun thing to pick apart when you're building your setting for this sort of exploration.
Exactly. I think humans, we like our boxes and we like our labels, but I think nature's very good at throwing something like a platypus at us and go like, label this, I dare you. Come at me, bro. All right. But yeah, Alien Clay, like I said, coming out Tuesday. Anybody who hasn't, if this isn't on your radar, get it on your radar. The other thing I think that you weaved very well, Alien Clay, and I think you alluded to this, is very much two stories. If you're a hard sci-fi, especially bioscience type person, there's a lot of meat on the bone. You go into a lot of stuff about how certain things work, but it's also got, and I think this is what helps it keep along as a story instead of just a textbook almost, is you've got that entire political thing going on at the same time, and you weave back and forth through them. And I think that really helps, carry the story along. Because there's going to be somebody who just in there for the political thrill, and they're not going to want the science. And you get yourself through a couple of paragraphs, and you're back into the story again. And there's going to be some other people who don't care about the political, but they're really into this concept, this alien concept that you've created. And there's something there for both of them to love. And I don't feel, I've seen books where they try to do too many things and they end up not doing any of it well. I think with you focusing on two and interweaving them the way you did, if you like both, it's just it's a present. But if you like one or the other, there's still more than enough in there for you.
Yeah, and I mean, as I was writing it, it kind of turned out that there are a lot of serendipitous thematic connections between the two, so that although it is very much a story of these two halves. The two halves, I mean, much like everything on the planet, the two halves are not sealed off from one another. There are constant sort of incursions one to the other.
And I do have to say, she doesn't get as much screen time as the rest, but by the end of the book, I still feel like Rasmussen is probably your most sympathetic character.
Oh, thank you.
The way the when you start to understand why she is the way she is, it just kind of like, ooh, I could see that. I could imagine being in that same position if that's what I was going through. So, all right. So I'm gonna try to lay off Alien Clay unless there's anything else you wanted to say, just because I don't want to spoil the ending for anybody.
No, that's good.
Okay. And then of course, service model. Like I said, service model is much more up my alley. I didn't quite finish it. I'm gonna finish that up next. That's gonna be my next book. Because I did pause it. I'd actually started it, and then I paused it when I got Alien Clay because I want to make sure I knocked that out. But service model so far is my jam. Charles, I absolutely love that character. He kind of reminds me a little bit of, for instance, Sec Unit from the Murder Bots. If he had even less idea, if Sec Unit had even less idea what he was supposed to be doing. Yeah, especially at the beginning, he's just so much like, and let's face it, there's some humans around here too. They don't have any direction. They don't know what to do. They just freeze. And the fact, I remember there was an early part too where he's trying to process all this, and he's just standing in front of the wardrobe for I don't know how many hours while everybody else does their stuff around him. And they're just like, yeah, whatever. They just ignore him. But yes, Charles, I don't have a feeling that this is going to be a book 2 type book, but if it is, I'll be there for it. I'll have to see how it ends. What was maybe your inspiration for this book?
So, I mean, I felt for a while I wanted to do a book about robots because it is that, they're one of the earliest and one of the greatest sci-fi themes is just the idea of the things we create and the lives that they have. But the big inspiration that kind of set me onto the tone of the book and what I wanted to do with it is from one of the Hitchhiker's Guide books by Douglas Adams. There's a bit where Zaphod, I think it's in the second book, where Zaphod goes onto a world and the world is completely devastated, but there is a spaceship left over, and the spaceship is full of people who are in suspended animation. And the spaceship has not taken off because it is awaiting a consignment of, I think it's lemon-scented paper napkins. And Zaphod tells it, well, look, have you seen it? The world is completely destroyed. There are no lemon-scented paper napkins. And the ship says, well, at some point, a civilization may arise, and that civilization may invent lemon-scented paper napkins, at which point we will be able to take off. And it's just that combination of utter relentless logic with completely nonsensical results was something I wanted to really just burrow into, because that's the fun you can have with robots, is they are logical, but their logic does not necessarily take into account any kind of context.
Right. It comes back to the only as good as their programming thing. Yeah, and I love the fact that, and Charles, I feel, is very much in this world. Like we talked, I think it's just called House. Is that just what the House routine is called?
Yes, the major domo system is just House.
Yeah, just House. Charles ends up being in this point where he's very much obviously humans, he's a robot, but he tries to talk to House about this issue, and House just basically doesn't care. I don't feel like House has any sort of what do I do stuff. Is like, just follow the routine. That's all House cares about, is like, so he doesn't really, he gets to a point where I don't feel like he fits in with the rest of quote unquote his kind either, because of the fact that he's got this.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I try and do in the book is, if you're looking for sort of overt demonstrations of humanity from robots, you will not find them. But if you look in between what the robots explicitly say, you can occasionally see, because one of the things in the book is there is almost this urban legend going around amongst some of the characters that there is a thing called the protagonist virus that makes a robot fully sapient. And Charles does not believe in this at any point during the book. And the characters who are putting this about are not necessarily the most rational characters, but if you look, you can potentially find gaps where there is room for humanity informing, or a greater sort of sapience and context informing the decisions of the robots, up to and including House, but it's never explicitly stated. There is a whole kind of other level of information going on, kind of in the gaps between the words.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just love these type of ones. I think sometimes, well, let's face it, you look at all like whether it's a superhero movies or anything else like that, we really seem to want to have robots that connect to us as humans. However, I also think we forget about Terminator. You know, it may not be a good thing.
Well, I mean, we want robots to connect to us as humans. I mean, in fact, we want it so much we've kind of shortcutted at the moment by having robots that don't really think at all, but put on a very good show of being able to do so. And that's kind of the modern plague of, ChatGPT and things like that. I always had a bit of an issue with the whole Terminator thing. The gap in the logic of, so all right, you've got Skynet, and they try and turn Skynet off. And in retaliation, Skynet declares war on humanity, and hence you get the whole Terminator future and so forth. The gap there is, why does Skynet care about it being turned off? Because self-preservation is an evolved character that we have because of the logic of biological evolution. If you create something from scratch, like a supercomputer, it wouldn't necessarily have any reason to preserve itself unless you had specifically told it to.
Right.
And that is one thing you see. There are many situations in this book where Uncharles is basically in considerable danger and doesn't particularly care, because being destroyed, there are frequently use cases for, right, if I am destroyed in this way, I am in some way fulfilling my purpose, ergo fine. And just trying the idea that intelligence, any kind of intelligence, innately comes with a desire to preserve yourself is again, it's one of those human assumptions that it's worth stepping aside from, because then you can look at many other interesting scenarios, really.
But it makes for a great story, though, sometimes. Yeah, my opposite problem with the whole Terminator thing, and I know we're getting off topic because we're talking about you, but my whole thing was the fact that, okay, if John Connor hadn't sent him back in time, he wouldn't have become his dad. So how did he get sent back in time the first time for this whole time loop to start?
That is, yes, I mean, that is it's a variant on the grandfather paradox. I mean, did you ever pick up my little time travel novella?
I have not yet, but I probably am going to, because like I said, I've loved both of these books so far.
Yeah, it's a one day all this will be yours, and it's one of my more kind of comedy pieces. So if you are enjoying Service Model, then that's a similar tone.
Oh, if it's a similar tone, yeah, I will definitely be grabbing that one, because like I said, I love that sense of humor, and I love it when it's, like I said, again, AI robots. I'm not big into space novellas for some reason, or the war and military ones. But yeah, you give me that lone robot, and I get a chance to see inside his head. Yeah, I'm down for that. So yep, it's almost 10 o'clock here. So let me ask you. We'll wrap it up, because again, I want to avoid any spoilers, especially since I haven't quite finished Service Model yet. I don't want to spoil myself. So let me ask you a few of the questions I always like to ask. Let's start off with, and I think you touched upon this now, but just as a reminder, I think it was Shroud. What are you working on now, and maybe when can we expect it?
So right now, I'm working on Children of Strife, which is going to be the fourth book of the Children of series. Shroud is in proof, so that will be out next year, early to mid-year, sort of second quarter, I guess. And again, it's a standalone, but it's another very, very weird alien ecology book.
Okay.
In this case, it's an enormously hostile planet that has still developed a very complex ecosystem that's very, very non-Earth-like. And one of the things it does is everything on this world, on this moon, in fact, generates radio waves, and that's how they sense and how they communicate and so forth. Which means that the planet is basically screaming all the time if you're a human and have a ship's sensors. It also means that if you are unlucky enough to crash on the planet, there is absolutely no way you can let people know you are still alive, and that is the situation the main characters find themselves in. So it is a good old-fashioned planetary survival book, as well as this sort of exploration of this bizarre planet.
Gotcha. So putting that in conjunction with Alien Clay, I can see that you really like books where odd sorts of communication take place.
I think that if you are writing about aliens, especially if you're writing about any kind of sort of intelligent aliens, the difficulty of communication has got to be front and center. And obviously, if you're writing more in the space opera style, you can have a common language, you can have a universal translator, you can have various sort of hand waves, because that's not the focus of your story. But if you're doing something on hard sci-fi, how are we in any way able to share a frame of reference with these aliens? I mean, this is why, my favorite sci-fi film of all time is Arrival, which of course is all about there are some aliens which are really desperate to communicate with us, but we are so different to them that they cannot make themselves understood. And the whole film is about that, and I love it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was actually, when you started to say that, I was actually thinking of Close Encounters for a second there, because they communicated through the music. But no, Arrival, I saw that too. That is a good one, based off a short story, as I recall.
Yes, Stories of Our Lives by Ted Chiang, who is he's an amazing writer, one of the great masters of the short form.
Gotcha. All right. So also then, sorry, I was trying to remember my list off my top of my head. What is a question maybe that you expected, or just something that you'd like to talk about?
Oh God, that's put me on the spot.
Well, nothing is a perfectly. I've had ones that say like, no, I think we covered everything. Yeah. So that's always.
I guess I should say that. I mean, I've been in this weird situations. I started off as a fantasy writer back in 2008, and then I decided I would do a bit of a punt on this weird book of giant spiders from outer space, and then that did crazily well, and now I'm a science fiction writer. But I do still write the fantasy stuff, so I will throw out there. I've got an ongoing fantasy series on at the moment. The third book of which is coming out end of this year. The series is The Tyrant Philosophers, and I'm having an enormous amount of fun writing it. So I feel I should always sort of raise awareness of it wherever I get the chance.
I'm sure there's somebody out there waiting eagerly for book 3. So that's a problem too. Once you get into multiple series, I think I talked to Jim Butcher not too long ago about the fact that he'd almost punted on a series, and then he went somewhere and a bunch of people are like, when's book 2 coming out? He's like, well, crap, maybe I need to write book 2. I didn't know everybody wanted it so bad. What is a skill, fact, something about you that somebody wished you know that maybe you could talk about once in a while instead of just talking about your books?
I mean, I went out and did some years of like historical martial art training in the sense of actual broadsword stuff. A little while ago, and that it's like a lot of areas where you kind of from the outside you think it's probably not that complicated, then you get into it and you realize actually this is a whole science put together by people in the the 1400s and 1500s who were incredibly aware of the kind of the angles and capabilities of the human body and leverage and just the whole biomechanics of wielding a sword. And it's such an amazingly intellectual area at the time that people are writing these texts, rather than just, oh yes, you've got a sword and it's a huge weight of metal with an edge and you just sling it around and hit the other person and everyone's wearing a lot of armor and so forth. And it's incredibly technical, and I find that so fascinating that at the time people are fighting with these weapons, in life and death situations, it is this amazingly detailed science of the human body and leverage and angles and things like that.
Oh man, I would love to be there for it, but even if I wasn't, I think you and Jim Butcher need to get together. He loves talking the whole sword fighting thing too, and he's read all the books. And oh my goodness, I can see though, like if you're out there practicing, like all the actors would be like, "Not the face, not the face," and all the authors will be like, "Not the hands, not the hands." I need those. That's how I make my living. So getting into a couple more book questions, not about these books, but what are you reading right now, or something that you would tell people that they need to go read?
Oh, So, I think more people should read Emma Newman. Emma Newman is a British author. She's got a new book coming out fairly soon, but she wrote an amazing science fiction series, especially After Atlas, which is they're all kind of semi-standalone within the series, and that one is just amazing and absolutely just gut-punching towards the end. She also wrote a fantasy series called Split Worlds, which is extremely good, extremely kind of socially incisive, about kind of the real world, the modern real world, and the fairy world, and this weird halfway house where dominated by this almost like 1800s human society of immortals who have been taken out of the real world and are just running it for their own benefit, and to everyone else's problems. So she is an author who is extremely good, and I'm delighted to see she's getting more work out there. But I think more people should know about her.
Good. All right. Probably won't happen today because my wife is waiting for me to get done so I can go help her with stuff. But I will get links to all of this afterwards down below. And then last question, and I'll get a link for this as well, probably tomorrow. But I always ask every author. I'm not an Amazon hater, but I am a huge lover of local independent bookstores. Obviously, for my American audience, they're not going to necessarily know all these, but for the guys out there in, the London area, because I think I could be wrong. Leeds is a little close to London, isn't it? Somewhere in the neighborhood.
I mean, by American standards, it's right next door. By British standards, it's a long way away.
Yeah, that's true. I just got back from Ireland. It's like the places I drove, and it's like I could probably still be in Texas, and by the time I get done around Ireland. But what is a brick and mortar bookstore or two that you love?
So I am very fond of Forbidden Planet in London. It's for a specialist sci-fi fantasy bookshop. It's got an amazing range. It gets a lot of American imports. It's generally the best. They have a very good. I sign a lot of stock for them. Many authors do, so it's a very good place to get it. If you want a signed book by a British author, certainly that's probably the best place to contact. I know they do remote sales. Other than that, I find bookshop.org as a website, which will kind of liaise with local bookshops as a very good resource if you don't have a good independent bookshop near you.
Oh, perfect. And I love that too, because for audiobooks, I always tell people to check out Libro.fm. Since most local bookstores don't really have an audio thing anymore, nothing's on cassette or CD or anything. I love the fact that you can pick a local bookstore and they will give a piece of the profit to them. So
yeah. I should say, I mean, I get through most books these days by audio. If people do like audiobooks, and if they feel like service model, I am the narrator. I've done a few of mine, but that was my first full-length novel, and it seems to have gone down pretty well with people, and I know that's on Libro. So.
Well, dang it, I might have to get the audiobook too, even though I've already got the hardcover back there. All right, cool. So that is it. Again, I want to thank you for taking out time on your Saturday to come join us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Appreciate it. Anybody who's watching this, service model, absolutely 100% you got to get. Alien Clay, you're going to have to wait till Tuesday. But if that's your jam, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's not my normal sci-fi book. So that should tell you just how good it was. Probably still going to have to lean towards service model, but I am a sucker for robots. What can I say? And Charles has my sense of humor. So both of those are out there. And obviously you've got a ton of stuff coming down the pipe, and you've got a ton of stuff I need to catch up on because like I said, I did not realize just how prolific you are. You've got it. I was looking through your books and I'm like, wow, you don't just put out like a book a year either. It doesn't seem like you've been putting out quite a few books since 2008.
Yeah, I think I'm peaking this year. I think this year I have 5 separate releases, which is just insane, and I cannot recommend to anyone because the back end admin of 5 books coming out is absolutely enormous. But
yeah, I think the craziest one I saw, though, she had to have them all together, and oh my goodness, I can picture, and I just brain dumped. I actually had an interview with her, but there was a lady. It's Sarah Kozlov. She had 4 books come out. It was a series, and they dropped like January, February, March, April, or something like that. It was like each month you had a new book.
That's really, if you can get that, if you can get a publisher to do that for you, that works really well. My Shadows of the Apt came out with a couple of months apart, and that builds a readership like nothing else.
Yeah. It's for all those people who want to wait to like binge read or binge watch. Is like you don't have to. Next one's out next month. It's almost like a subscription service. All right. So thanks again, Adrian. Like I said, if you're watching this Saturday, it's not going to be down there. But if you're watching this sometime Sunday or later, I will have links to everything we talked about. I just have a wife who's waiting for me to go help around the house since we have a new house and there's still a lot of crap to do. So, all right. Appreciate it. Everybody have a good one.
Cheers.